Hello and welcome to the second season of Sunday Stories Live, brought to you by the 1947 Partition Archive, a global non-profit, non-governmental organization that works tirelessly to preserve the nearly lost oral histories of partition. And it has documented the life stories of more than 9,700 witnesses to the South Asian partition of 1947. The Oral History Project is the largest of its kind in South Asia, and with perseverance, passion, and dedication, they have made it possible to preserve unique stories in about 750 different cities and villages across 18 countries. Sunday Stories is an event series that will bring to you insightful and informative conversations with academics, scholars, historians, artists, poets, filmmakers, architects, and musicians, as well as people's personal stories of the partition. Like the name suggests, it will take place every Sunday at the same time. So please be sure to tune in. My name is Sonam Kalra. I'm a musician with my own personal interest and body of work on partition. And today we have on the show someone I greatly admire for how she brings to her craft all that she believes in and the many dimensions of what it means to truly be an architect. I have the absolute pleasure to be in conversation with one of India's most important conservation architects, Gurmeet S. Rai. Gurmeet is a conservation architect and heritage management specialist based in New Delhi. She established CRCI India Pvt Ltd, a leading firm in the heritage practice in India in 1996. CRCI, since its inception, has prepared cultural heritage conservation and management plans for many significant heritage sites, including the World Heritage Sites of the Red Fort, New Delhi, and Ellora Cave, Maharashtra, which are of national significance, as well as those of regional and local levels for governments, private, bilateral, and multilateral agencies. She has been appointed as Heritage Specialist for the conservation of the Parliament building in New Delhi this year. The work of CRCI has been in the states of Punjab, Rajasthan, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir. CRCI was appointed as the Hriday City Anchor for the historic cities of Amritsar and Puri by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. UNESCO appointed her as the lead consultant for the preparation of cultural heritage policy for Punjab in 2011. And in 2012, she was appointed by the World Monuments Fund in New York as the project management consultant for the conservation of 43 protected monuments in Madhya Pradesh. CRCI was also awarded the Award of Distinction by UNESCO for 2 projects under the Asia Pacific Architectural Heritage Awards in the year 2002 and 2004, following which she has been on the jury of the Asia Pacific Architectural Heritage Awards of UNESCO for over 15 years. She's presented papers at several national and international platforms, and she's currently a member of the steering committee of the TERRA 2022, the World Congress on Earthen Architectural Heritage, to be organized by the Getty Conservation Institute in Santa Fe. She also serves on several national advisory bodies, and CRCI has undertaken international assignments in Nepal and Myanmar, and has been an advisor to UNESCO in the heritage sector in several countries in Southeast Asia. Wow. Thank you so much, Gurmeet, for agreeing to speak with us and for agreeing to share your insights. Gurmeet's co-author of her book, which she has just released, the celebrated lensman Raghu Rai, was supposed to join us for the latter part of this conversation, but unfortunately he will not be able to make it. So it's just Gurmeet, but I know we're going to have so much to discuss that we're possibly going to run out of time. Gurmeet, welcome, and thank you for being on Sunday Stories.
Thank you so much, Sonam. I'm delighted to be on this platform and to be able to share this very, very precious journey of ours, of Raghu's and mine, engaging with the city of Amritsar. So thank you so much for this wonderful, this really elaborate introduction as well.
No, we're really thrilled to have you. And of course, it is impossible to speak of partition and to not speak of Amritsar. And your book, which you launched on Baisakhi this year, Amritsar, a City in Remembrance, what a beautiful name as well. It's an in-depth study of Amritsar and its many different faces, its spiritual as well as its religious and political importance. Congratulations, of course, on the book. It really is quite special, with beautiful photographs by Raghu Rai, the celebrated lensman, and essays by experts from various disciplines. Amritsar, a city in remembrance, traces the history and culture of the city through the dual perspective of historical narratives and material culture. William Dalrymple called it a beautifully written and wonderfully photographed love letter to Amritsar. I have to tell you that since I received the book, I don't think I've ever read a book on architecture or history and wept. And there was something about your book that moved me so much that I was sitting there reading the book and weeping. And I can only imagine, and this is what I really want to delve deep with you on, what it was that brought you to Amritsar, Gurmeet. Tell us about the book, why Amritsar, and does the city of Amritsar have special personal significance to you?
It's a wonderful question, but the answer is my life journey. So it's not going to be a brief answer.
No, we have time.
So basically, as a conservation architect, I mean, it starts when I actually chose to become a conservation architect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a student of architecture, when I was doing my undergraduation in Chandigarh, okay, before I say that, I must say that my roots lie in Punjab. I come from a village in Gurdaspur, and that's where my paternal side is. And my mother's side is from Lahore. And post-partition, my grandfather during partition, had to leave Lahore, and they were rehabilitated in a small town called Kotkapura in the Faridkot district. And that's where I was born, incidentally. So my family is very rooted in Punjab. I've got relatives all over, so all around. But our generation, my generation, I travel quite a bit because my father was in the Air Force, but every year it was like a calendar for us. Summer vacation, winter vacation had to be in Punjab, and we used to go to our village. So I've grown up. My formative years have been in the landscape of Punjab. And I would say my foundational learning is that my father was a very proud Sikh, and there were certain practices which I witnessed and experienced as a child that had, I would say, everlasting imprint on my existence. So I chose to be an architect for certain reasons, and when I was in my through my course, I was very interested in history of architecture. I was very interested in materials, and to an extent that I became a potter and so on.
You worked, sorry to interrupt you, but just so everyone knows, you worked with the gentleman who created the concept of blue pottery. And
yes, Daddy G was my
Daddy G, right? He was called Daddy G, was your mentor, right?
So that's what I did during my college days. I'm sorry, I'm going in a bit of a detail here, but I thought it's very kind of why roots are important. And what this book does is why William calls it what he calls it is because it's anchored in my existence. It's not a project that I did. And I worked in an architectural firm for a year after my undergraduation. And then I realized this is not something I want to do by itself. I wanted to delve in history, in historical architecture, in heritage, but it wasn't quite clear. And why it wasn't clear was because conservation wasn't a domain that was being done by architects when in my formative years. I mean, I'm talking about the late 80s. And there was only one college in India that offered a program in architectural conservation, and that was School of Planning in Delhi. And that program started in 1987, and I joined that course in 1989. So literally, we're the first, generation conservation architects in India. So I recall, in the interview, Professor K.T. Ravindran asked me, "Why do you want to do conservation?" And my answer was that I want to go to Punjab and engage with the heritage of Punjab. And I literally was choking over my voice with almost teary eyes and all that. And I didn't know where this answer was coming from. But that question was so important. And there was, and I wasn't prepared for that question, so it just went deep in. And so anyway, so that was my first articulation. And it was then after my conservation program, I worked with the National Trust in India for about 3 years. And at some point in 95, I decided that I needed to understand Punjab better. I need to develop my own tools of understanding heritage. And the only way I can do that is if I go to Punjab, because I am familiar with the culture of Punjab. And therefore, when I engage with material culture, I'll be able to do justice to it. I'll be able to, a lot of steps would have been covered because it's inborn in me to kind of, it resonates with me. So so the first project I did, I kind of conceptualized and did some fundraising to undertake that project was mapping of heritage along the Grand Trunk Road and the Mughal Highway in Punjab. So we traveled from Ambala all the way to the Atari border over a year, mapping heritage buildings, cultural practices, crafts on either side of the road. The Badshahi Sarak, the Mughal Imperial Highway, which is from Ambala till Philor. And then, of course, the Mughal road is different from that of the Grand Trunk Road, but then we did both the roads. And that's where Amritsar comes in. So my introduction to the city of Amritsar happened for the first time when I was mapping heritage on the Grand Trunk Road. And the fact that after Punjab fell to the British, to the East India Company in 1849 after the Anglo-Sikh Wars, the first infrastructure project that was done by the East India Company was the Grand Trunk Road. And this part of the road connecting Philor to Lahore was realigned to include Amritsar. Otherwise, Amritsar was not on the Mughal Imperial Highway, and that had Philor to Noor Mahal, Nakodar, Sultanpur Lodi, and across, to Atari. And so that's what. So my story with Amritsar begins, other than the fact that as a child, I had been taken to the Golden Temple, to the Darbar Sahib several times. This was my first kind of experience. So over the years, my practice, the trajectory that it took was that we had to do a lot of activism by way of going to the government and saying, look, heritage needs to be protected. We need to first prepare the inventories. We need to map heritage. And that's your first management tool, and then begin the restoration process. That journey of mine started with Punjab in 95, 96. And subsequently, in the first decade of my work, conservation started taking roots somewhere in governance. Amritsar is a city that I kept going back to again and again, to either restore a monument like the Rambagh Garden, which is there in the book, the Summer Palace of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, or the conservation plan, the recovery of the Gobindgarh Fort, which was completely lost in the landscape. I mean, in the landscape of the urban landscape of Amritsar, people had forgotten that there is a fort of Maharaja Ranjit Singh sitting here, embedded in the military area. It's not a cantonment, it's a military station. That's what I think it's called. And to find it and to then collaborate with the government, do all the technical support, documentation and all that, for then the government to ask, claim or, demand restoring of the monument back to the people of Punjab from the Ministry of Defense. And incidentally, it's the first fort, I don't think there have been more after that, where the militaries actually transferred a military fort to the civilian government and also transferred the title of that land to the civilian government. So I think I can stop on this particular question at this point, but I mean that forms the kind of introduction to.
I actually find it very beautiful that you refer, even in your book, to it as not just the restoration, but the recovery of heritage. And I find that a beautifully chosen word, because recovering a heritage means, and even while you were just speaking about how you were mapping culture, you were mapping the work of artisans, that all, when one thinks traditionally of architecture, one doesn't think of all these things. And you seem to have restoried it, perhaps, in some ways, which is very beautiful as well. But tell me more about, I know that many people know this, but, we were talking about the etymology of the name of Amritsar. We were talking about tell us, you've just talked about the Gobindgarh Fort, but tell us what all you recovered in this beautiful process of recovery of the heritage.
It's the story of Amritsar, or the story of Punjab, is a story of, one thing I do believe is the Punjabi community, or I wouldn't want to say the Sikh community here, but I'd say the Punjabi community does not feel like a victim. But somewhere deep inside, there is pain.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting what Raghu also says. He says, the Sikhs, he refers to the Sikhs. He says outside they are kind of, like military men and all that. But he says the moment they enter a sacred Gurdwara, and especially Darbar Sahib, he says they are like, bees around a pot of honey. Swarming, and the humility and the love, and
I think they turn to mush.
Yes. Yeah. And you just have to scratch the surface to understand the vulnerability of the community. And I would say the reason why I engage with Punjab is because there's certain and Harmandir Sahib or Amritsar, is that there's certain universal principles of humanism that you get, it evokes in you, and then you extend yourself to what does heritage mean, where does it touch people on a human level. Now, my engagement with Harmandir Sahib, of course, one site that I chose to not chose, I think it was a calling, and I think the site chose me.
I was just going to say, I'm going to just say something before this, and I'm interrupting you. You're going to forgive me, but I don't know if you can do a share, but I'm going to lift up your book to everyone to see, because I want to actually show them. And I'm going to show it like this, perhaps, or this. Hang on a second. When I looked at this cover, when I looked at your cover, it felt to me like, I'm trying to bring it into perspective. It felt to me like this was the keyhole to Sikhism. It was the key, the structure of that, with that, the larger, the shrine in the middle, the Darbar Sahib in the middle, and this long passage. It just felt like it was the key. And everything in your book then, your connection with Harmandir Sahib, it feels like I said, the keyhole to Sikhism. And you yourself said in one of your interviews, and you just said it again, you said that Harmandir Sahib revealed itself to me. So, in fact, now I'm moving away a little bit just from Amritsar and specifically coming to Harmandir Sahib. You shared so many beautiful facts with me when we spoke on Thursday about the poetry, and I'm going to let you just take us all through that, because it was so fascinating.
It's very interesting. It's interesting because my engagement with Harmandir Sahib through my last 20 years of work, or every time I've kind of engaged with the site, it reveals something more and something more and something more. The first time when I engaged with the site was when I got very disturbed about some work that was happening on the shrine, with the gold sheets were being replaced. And for me, it was, I was, just started my professional career understanding the material fabric. So for me, brick and lime and plaster and gold sheets and all of that was very important. This is conservation. You have to work with the material fabric. So I think got into I think people got a little upset with me as well, because for me, this was a very, very important issue, that you don't remove gold sheets like this, and there has to be a whole understanding, rationale, management, whatever. Now, this was in the early 90s. My second engagement with the site was that Dr. Richard Engelhardt, who has written the foreword to the Amritsar book, he visited Punjab and he'd come to give us an award for a work that I had done in Gurdaspur on one of the monuments. And he looked at this site, experienced it, and he said, Gurmeet, why aren't you working on nominating Harmandir Sahib as a World Heritage Site? And that time, I knew very little, but he said, look at this place, for a Westerner, though he spent many decades in Southeast Asia. He said, this is a phenomenal spirit of a community. And especially if Punjab has no World Heritage Site, especially if the Sikh community is not represented on the World Heritage list, it's a very, very important site. So we began the process, and I won't get into that into many details because it's already covered. Some bits of it is covered in the book as well. Now, I would like to answer the question that you asked is how did the site reveal itself to me? So at that point, I tried to understand the architecture of the place, and we wanted to nominate the site under a couple of criteria, in which 2 and 4, I think, where it said that how it's a unique piece of architecture. It represents a community, or a community that is living and vibrant and all that. It could have been a community that doesn't exist, but here it was, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
In the whole course of the preparation of the nomination dossier, suddenly we were a multidisciplinary team in Harmandir Sahib, working on it, living in a sarai, in and out of Harmandir Sahib, and it was like one of the most beautiful times in my life. And then it occurred to everybody that, look, central to the site is the Guru Granth Sahib, and the Guru Granth Sahib has the Bani, and so the architecture of the Prakash Sthan, which is a self-illuminated space, and the illumination comes from the knowledge and what is there in the Guru Granth Sahib, and the fact that Guru Arjan Dev created this shrine to house the Adi Granths, and then subsequently, when I was trying to understand, when we were doing the measure drawings and all that, and we realized that everything about Harmandir Sahib was a social statement, breaking away from the social norms of the time. We are talking about a time where there was caste system, there was divisions between religions and all that. We're talking about the 15th century of Guru Nanak Dev Ji and the 16th century of the first 4 gurus. And so to understand the architecture, I describe all of that here. And then one evening I was inside Harmandir Sahib looking at the seva that was happening. And we were all very familiar with those beautiful ornamentation of the gold sheets on the periphery, on the outside surface, and all that inlay work and this very decorative flooring, even at the threshold of the shrine before you go inside. Yes. There is this lovely inlay work in the flooring of under the patronage or supervision of Lena Singh Majitia. It's all written there at the threshold, and that's all animals and the water, the life of the creation in water, and then on the vertical surfaces you see all flora and fauna and so on. And then you walk inside. And that night I was waiting that when they roll the carpet after the palki has, taken Guru Granth Sahib to the Akal Takht, I was waiting for a very decorative flooring that's going to emerge when the carpet is going to be rolled. And I was amazed to see a blank piece of white stone there. Wow. And no elaborate decoration. And that's when I realized that there is the symbolism here. That how the Nam was the most important thing to it in that central Prakashthan, that space. And it's not about renderings and beautifications and the embellishments of the Maya of the world, And Beautiful. That is what I understood at that point, which I captured in the nomination dossier, about how Harmandir Sahib represents a certain philosophy in architecture. And that's when we realized that the nomination should not be from the perspective of the community alone or the architecture, but about Guru Granth Sahib itself. And that is because that's what the Gurus wanted the entire community to understand and uphold. And therefore, we included the criteria 6, which is about intangible heritage. And that's what my sociologist professor said. He said, you have to see across the world, what is the form of literature that the world is producing. And when Guru Arjan Dev was kind of writing authoring, writing, and putting this whole editing, this whole Adi Granth to music. And he said this is probably the most profound piece of work that was happening in the late 17th century. Sorry, early 17th century. We're talking about 1604 here.
Yeah.
So anyway, that is what happened. But still, I was in a bit of a gray space in terms of, which I thought I had understood enough, is that Harmandir Sahib had been desecrated through the 18th century with many invasions and so on, and the invaders wanted to get their finger on the pulse of this community that was so kind of getting inspired from this space,
Right.
and trying to figure that out. And after that desecration, where the reconstruction happens to the later part of the 18th century, and subsequently the embellishments that happen to Harmandir Sahib under the patronage of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and the other, I would say just him, but a larger Sikh community. And I just thought it was an act of, love and, patronage, and, it was stability, and therefore there was a lot of arts and crafts and, and stuff like that. It was only while I was putting this book together that Harmandir Sahib revealed itself to me a little bit more. And, I felt so overwhelmed. And these were two little aspects. And, there'll be maybe others as well, but the two major ones that I would share with you. One is that I started looking for that what was the reference that Guru Arjan Dev would have had for this architecture of this site. And I was very mindful. This is another professor of mine, Professor K.T. Ravindra, at one point when I, as a young, many years before that, I had asked him, that do you think this is by design? This is when I was doing the nomination dossier about the the symbolism and all that. That is it by accident that I'm reading all of this, or is it actually for real? I was also into a bit of self-doubt. So his answer to me was that
I think we have lost Gurmeet briefly. And we're just going to wait for her to come back. There she is, coming back.
Yeah, some problem. I don't know whether it's
mine.
No,
that's okay. No, so you were just saying that your professor was telling you, and then we
so
lost.
You were saying that. So it was more because I was into some sort of self-doubt whether I was understanding Harmandir Sahib the way it's meant to be. And also, you feel main choti chi cheez, and a me small thing. What am I trying to understand all of this? And putting it out there. And so this time in my, while I was still researching that, okay, what was the inspiration for
this building? Oh, we've lost you again. I think we are losing you again. So while we wait for Gurmeet to come back, oh, there she is.
Yeah,
there you are.
Yeah. So I started doing some research that does the Bani say about Harimandir? And I had heard, even in Kirtan about Harimandir mentioned several times.
Right.
And then I came across, and I couldn't believe. I would say, this is what the Guru's blessings, I would believe.
Yeah.
That in the Sri Rag, in the Guru Granth Sahib, there is this most beautiful poetry by Guru Nanak Dev Ji, where he refers to the Harmandir. And that's, I said, oh my God, then this is what Guru Arjan Dev had references for, where, though, I hope I'm not being too audacious here, that the Jyot is the same. If you're a believer
Right.
river, but then
Yeah.
there is a reference here. There's a beautiful poetry by Guru Nanak Dev Ji where he talks about Harmandir, and he describes it. So I said, here Guru Arjan Dev
Right.
had
So it's linking,
as a reference. And that's what I use in the book, that this is, and before that, Dr. B.N. Goswami and I, when we were talking about what the inspiration could have been, and Dr. B.N. Goswami was saying that, look, Jal Mahal, a palace in the waters, the barge that takes you across the life, your through life.
to
There
the
are a
other
lot of
side. Right.
to the other side of existence or whatever, life journey. Those references are there. So we stayed with that as far as the nomination dossier is concerned. But it was during my research work for this particular book that I came across that piece of poetry. And I said, wow, now this is the reference for the form, the architecture.
Will you share the
sure.
poem with us, please?
It's in Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji and on 17, the page number 17. And it goes, it says, Prabh Harmandir Sona, Tisme Manak Lal, Moti Hira Nirmala, Kanchan Kot Risal.
I think Gurmeet is struggling with her internet connection, but we hope she'll be back really soon so she can share this beautiful poem with us. I actually have her book, so I'm going to try and see if I can find it for you and read from the book. So you'll have to give me a minute as well. Oh, there she is. She's back.
Sonam, I was just wondering whether I should keep my camera down, if that helps.
Let's try that just briefly and see. Yeah, it might help the bandwidth.
Yeah, okay. So, like I was reading out the writing here, and the way it translates is that the palace of the Lord is so beautiful. Within it, there are gems, rubies, pearls, and flawless diamonds. A fortress of gold surrounds this source of nectar.
Oh, beautiful.
And if I were to go to the another line, subsequent lines, I mean, I'm jumping few lines. It says, Gur Pori Bere Guru Gur Tulaha Harna. Which means that the Guru is the ladder, the Guru is the boat, the Guru is the raft to take me to the Lord's name.
I read that and it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
And then it says, Gursar Sagar Bohite Ho, Gur Tirath Daryau, which means the Guru is the boat to carry me across the world ocean. The Guru is the sacred shrine of pilgrimage, and the Guru is the holy river. And then it says, Jetis Pave Ujale Satsar Navan Jao, which is, if it pleases him, I bathe in the pool of truth and become radiant and pure. Now, what I would like to bring out here is that what was completely mind-blowing for me is that how the Guru becomes central, that he you talk about the palace of the Lord, which is so beautiful, and it is kind of all embellished with, gems and rubies and pearls. Now, that is a reference, I would imagine, that the 18th century patrons had and the craftsmen had. Sorry, not 19th century, during Maharaja Ranjit Singh time, because the building was not embellished with all of these glitters and things like that until Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And the fact that subsequently, to get to the palace of the Lord, you immerse yourself in the Guru. And the Guru is the ladder, the Guru is the boat, the Guru is the raft, and he's also the Amrit Sarovar within which you immerse yourself. So basically, the Amrit Sarovar is the Guru within which you immerse yourself to therefore. That complete surrender. I'm getting goose skin with that.
It's beautiful. So Amritsar, which is Amrit Sarovar as well, yeah.
And therefore, the revelation was that it is the Sarovar that inspired. I mean, the idea of bathing, immersing yourself into the sarovar means into the Guru. So when you feel that you are
Into God.
completely surrendered to the Guru, no, not to God, to the Guru. It's
To the Guru.
different to the Guru. And therefore, subsequently, when you look at the morchas that happened and the role of the Punjabis in the freedom struggle and all of that, what becomes critical is they used to come, have a ishnan in the sarovar, and they would matha teko at the Akal Takht Sahib and go on their mission. And the reason why the Afghans wanted to understand that where were such passions coming from and why they desecrated Harmandir Sahib, because they said this sarovar was doing something to the community.
Well,
And you know what? And in architecture, I would also say that this is probably the only sacred shrine. I mean, I may be being too commanding here, which does not have walls. The boundary of the shrine is actually the water, which means it is it's completely pervious,
must.
and it
Yeah.
and the way it sat, the way Harmandir Sahib sat from the time of the inception of the site by Guru Ram Das, was there were no boundary walls. The boundaries of Harmandir Sahib was the water, and you cannot get more pervious and more make a space more accessible than the
Yeah.
idea of using water there. So I think I should stop my story.
No, that's beautiful. I'm going to ask you to try and maybe switch your video on again, because to be able to see you, I think it's speak with all this passion. It's sort of much more moving. You also mentioned in your book, it says there are two more things that we're talking about the architecture. I want you to talk about the similarity of, what you spoke to me about Har Ki Pauri in Harmandir Sahib and Har Ki Pauri in Haridwar. And also you mentioned in your book that there are architectural components that constitute the Harmandir Sahib precinct, which resemble the social and material forms used in Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions. And I think that's such an important point. So if you just elaborate on both these, it would be really lovely.
Yeah. So, I was always intrigued why the flight of stairs behind, the Prakash Sthan, the square form, like Harmandir Sahib, if you look at the architecture, it's that square within a square. Where the Prakash Sthan is, and then you have an extended space which is a bay, the rear part of the Sachkhand, and that has a flight of steps that take you into the sarovar where people go and take some amrit and all that, and that is called Har Ki Pauri. And somewhere I was always intrigued that why is this called Har Ki Pauri? And I was also familiar that there are other Har Ki Pauris as well. So last year in September, just post-COVID one wave, I dared to travel and I went to Haridwar to check out what is this Har Ki Pauri there, what happens at Har Ki Pauri. And I went to the city, I walked along the ghats on the opposite side of where the ghats, where the mansions are, reached the Har Ki Pauri, and suddenly I realized that the Har Ki Pauri is not along the alignment of the ghats. It's a little skewed, like a little bay, three-sided bay, in a similar form like the bay of of Harmandir Sahib, the rear side. So I looked at it and I kind of asked them what the mythology or the association or whatever history with this is. And they did explain what it is. And then I came back to my studio and I asked my girls at the office, I said, let's pick up the satellite image of Haridwar and pick up the satellite image of Harmandir Sahib and see what is a relationship. Because for Guru Arjan Dev, there was a pond there. The sarovar had, soft edges to give it a distinctive form. It's not a square, it's not a rectangle, it's a parallelogram. And the fact that he gave it a distinct form, you had to be sure about what you wanted to orient towards. It can't just be arbitrarily. You can't say that Guru just made this line anywhere. And and I was amazed that when I overlaid these two plans, I realized that the alignment of the Har Ki Pauri at Haridwar and Har Ki Pauri at Harmandir Sahib is the same. It's aligned, exactly
Another
aligned.
incredible revelation, right? I mean, as you said,
Yeah, yeah.
it's just absolutely
Absolutely.
fantastic. I mean, I
And
can
then,
imagine. Sorry, go ahead, please.
no, please,
No, I'm
go
just
ahead.
saying, I mean, all the lovely revelations, as you said, that you had, and I know we're just literally skimming the surface, but I also want to talk about, when you restored Gur Ki Masjid in Gurdaspur, a 370-year-old mosque, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, built by Guru Har Gobind, who was our sixth guru. And tell us a little bit about, what you discovered about this sacred space. It was, from what you told me the other day, it was a Sikh guru who built this mosque. I mean, that's another incredible thing to have found during this, not restoration work, but recovery of heritage, as you say.
That's an interesting way to. I'm very pleased to have that question at this moment, because my book closes with this chapter on the learnings of heritage conservation for me as tools for conservation, and after understanding what material culture, what heritage means to a community, and as a conservation professional. And my huge learning for conservation in Punjab comes from my engagement with Guru Ki Masjid. Now, I came across this site in the course of mapping, because that's how I started. I said, we must map heritage of Punjab. And so I was doing district Gurdaspur. That's a no-brainer why I would map heritage in Gurdaspur.
Of course, right.
And I reached the town of Sriharkopinspur, and on top of somebody's haveli, I'm looking down and I see this mosque. And I said, hey, masjid, and then what is this mosque? I was imagining it would be one of that, partition, the Pehla Muslim sige, and they used to use it. Now they don't use it. They said, hey, Guru Ki Masjid hai. I literally jumped off that terrace. I said, really? I said, Guru Ki Masjid की मतलब कहते जी ये गुरु हरगोबिंद साहब ने बनाई सी. I couldn't believe, because I was dying at that point looking for sites associated with the gurus which had not become marbleized and wasn't a gurdwara without the original
tourist attraction. Yeah.
It's not just that, Sonam. I would say that it's all out of a lot of reverence that people build, and we do need gurdwaras. We need to be all that is important for the community. The sad part is that the historic, the structure is pulled down, and the significant, and therefore you can lose the story. The story becomes a story in the storybook. It becomes mythology. If you have material culture standing there, it's not myth. It's real. It's real. It's for real.
It's living and breathing. Yeah.
So the Gurdwara can be close to it within the same precinct, but need not be on the same spot.
Right.
So to have found the Gurdwara, the mosque, then I went there, and it was in a very bad condition, but there was Prakash of Guru Granth Sahib inside, and I met Baba Balwant there, young Nihang Singh there, and I kind of understood. I said, he gave me this Gurbilas Chevi Pachai. He read out.
We're going to wait just a few seconds. I'm sure her connection will come back. This is so interesting that I think even the internet gods have to be kind to us and allow Gurmeet's signal to come back.
I'm so sorry about this, because I don't know why this is happening, because it's showing me complete, that a very strong signal, but for some reason it keeps going off. Okay, so coming back to Guru Ki Masjid. So Baba Balwant said, so all sites associated with Guru Har Gobind Sahib is actually managed by the Nihang Singhs. And I was, so he told me, he said, Tarna Dal headquarters is in Baba Bakala, and you'll need to go and meet Baba Kirtan Singh, who was heading it. And so that's what. So that's a long journey, and how I met with this most glorious Baba Kirtan Singh, and I had the most beautiful dialogue with him. And that dialogue is captured in this book in the last chapter, where I talk about, the chapter is called Towards Principled Conservation
Right.
and Revitalization.
Which I'm going to ask you a
And
little
because
more in detail about, right? As well. Yeah.
yes, so I realized that Punjab has a tradition, obviously, such a vibrant tradition of seva, and such vibrant traditions of democratic principles which our gurus put in place, between the
Yeah.
Panch Pyaras and the Gurmata and so on. And therefore, anything precious that you want to do, which connects with communities and which is precious for the collective, the same principles need to be applied there. How are we so disconnected that we do not have our own principles, for engaging with heritage, which means a lot to a lot of people. And
Right.
therefore, my chapter goes, so my essay on principled conservation talks about these living practices, as well as what is embodied, the knowledge embodied in the Guru Granth Sahib, which talks about Pavan Guru Pani Pita Mata. Today we are talking
Right.
about sustainable development. We are talking about, inclusive development. We're talking about nature and culture. We're talking about climate action. All of that is very much embedded in the Bani of the gurus. And therefore, we don't have to go anywhere else but understand the ancient wisdom, or the medieval period wisdom, or ancient
No,
wisdom,
it's true.
very much with our communities. And people live it as well. We just need to recognize that and enhance that. And so that's what it is. And
No,
that's
I
how I
love.
conclude the chapter.
No, I know. And I was going to actually even ask you, because I know that one of the people who've written an essay in your book, Jigna Desai, who's an associate professor and program chair for Masters in Conservation and Regeneration at the Faculty of Architecture and CEPT, she says that like most historic cities in India, Amritsar lives with its memory, however glorious or scarring. And this is evident in the layers of history on how conservation processes are taken up and with what intentions. And what I found so interesting in your whole book, um, even though, like I said, it's a book on architecture, there was a beautiful enveloping of everything around it. I mean, of course, I want to ask you as well, before we go into questions, I want to ask you, what is your mission? Maybe I'll ask you that now before I go to the next question. What is your mission? What is the mission and vision of the Cultural Resource Conservation Initiative? And how do you really believe, and you've mentioned it to some degree, that conservation should be viewed and approached? And, it's really interesting to me how for you architecture is such a complete weaving together of the entire fabric of a community, of a city.
So going forward, I was part of a team. There was an MOU that was signed between UNESCO and Government of Punjab to do a cultural heritage policy for Punjab. This was done in 2013, and unfortunately, that hasn't been implemented. So if there's one important thing I think I would like government to engage with, is to put that policy in place, because policy then impacts legislation, it impacts processes. But I'm a hands-on person, and I also feel that there is relevance in doing demonstration projects. So I use the word recovery quite a bit. The reason
Yeah.
being, I feel it was my generation that has worked primarily on recovering, because there was no conservation work done in the state before our work. There were just about
Right.
30 odd monuments protected by the Archaeological Survey of India, and a similar number by the state government. The number has increased of state government to about 90, but that's not how you look at heritage. It can't be little fossilized structures. It has to be understood in a more holistic manner, which I've already described. So today, it's interesting that you've asked that. In the last so many months, with the farmers' protests, with all that, with Punjab's agonizing on what's happened to our water table, to the state of our water bodies in villages, to the state of health, food, which is so contaminated with fertilizers. We need to look at conservation in a holistic way. Like I said, we need to look at our memories, and memories, of course, get impacted with material culture. But we need to look at a development paradigm, which is which is holistic, informed by the principles I've already shared. We don't have
Right.
to, as much as I enjoy reading SDGs and so on, the Sustainable Development Goals and all that, but I think the tools are very much with us. And so I've conceptualized with the team a project of working along the Upper Bari Dwab Canal in Gurdaspur. It's a canal which, between, Gurdaspur and Amritsar are between the two rivers of Ravi and Beas. And there's a canal which, the Upper Bari Dwab Canal, which at one point brought water to even the Sarovar in Harmandir Sahib. And the branches go to Lahore as well. And to demonstrate heritage conservation, non-farm sector development, because women need a lot of attention in Punjab because there is a whole lot of issues related to that. We need to look at urban planning. We need to look at food processing, sustainable agricultural practices, and so on. And I feel that if we look at this, like I worked on the Grand Trunk Road, that if we were to look at the linear corridor of the Upper Bari Dwab Canal, we could touch upon the lives of people, looking at both material culture, both nature and culture, and impact the quality of life of people, because that's critical. So that's my dream project. So I've got two things on my...
But it's also very exciting. It's very exciting that when one thinks traditionally of a conservation architect or someone who works with heritage, one doesn't think of the future. One generally sort of assumes it to be all about history. So it's very exciting to me, just as a layperson, that you have taken not only, as I said, the life of an entire community, sort of imbibed it into your way of working, and you're looking at the future. I'm going to quickly, Sharon Valia has asked, why was it called Masjid if there was Guru Granth Sahib's Prakash there?
See, Guru Ki Masjid is called Guru Ki Masjid in the Gurbilas Chevi Pachai, which is a 19th century document, where its historic name is Guru Ki Masjid because it was built by the Guru. And the reason why it got built was that this was, this Guru Har Gobind, very few people know, his forces had 3 battles with the Mughal forces. And the Sikh forces won all 3 times. And one of the battles is the Battle of Sriharkopinspur. Now, this particular site had a haveli of one of those people who, now I forget the detail, who was one of the conspirators. And so that house, it had that piece of land belonged to that particular man. Whether it had a house or what association, I don't remember those details. It's all in the Gurbilas. So there was this communication, and that communication happens between his people and of the forces of Guru Har Gobind. And I wouldn't say they were a mixed community. I wouldn't say it was probably only the Sikhs. And he was asked what to do with this land. So Guru Sahib said, if I remember it in bits and pieces, and I would encourage you to do that research yourself as well, because we're talking about 20-year-old memory of a 54-year-old woman. So Guru Sahib said that, look, if I, on such a site, the fact that they had a battle with the Mughal forces, he needs to build a structure which demonstrates for future generation that this wasn't a battle between 2 communities. They weren't fighting Muslim Sikh battles here. So it was a site of a person who probably wasn't a Sikh. It was built by a Sikh guru, and it was a structure which was a Muslim structure. So he wanted to demonstrate so that it commemorates that this is not an inter-community warfare. It was against a certain principle that the battle happened. So the name Guru Ki Masjid, and it's a very sweet little story
Beautiful.
there, because it says Vishwakarma comes to the Guru and says, Menu seva do. And Vishwakarma is the great architect of the universe. And there's that bit of mythology, that bit of referencing as well. So it's a very beautiful thing. And I even questioned Professor Romila Thapar on how do I read this piece of text, and she had a very beautiful interpretation on that. Anyway, so that's why it was called Guru Ki Masjid. Now, because it probably was used by the Muslims till the partition, and after they left, the fact that all sites associated with Guru Har Gobind, Miri Piri de Pacha, the 2, symbols, all the sites are looked after by the Nihangs. The only way they could look after the site or engage with the site, their practices is related to the Sikh tradition. So to look after a site, to hold it in reverence, they couldn't go and matha teko a mosque, obviously, because that's not their practice. They matha teko the Guru Granth Sahib. So when I went there at that point, there was the Guru Granth Sahib housed inside, and the mosque was being retained while the Guru Granth Sahib Prakash was inside, and the Nihang Singhs were looking after it. So there's a lot of literature on our work on that part. Some bit I haven't written, so maybe I need to write about Guru Ki Masjid a little bit, about our work.
I think that's the next book.
Yeah. So that's what. I hope that answers your question.
Before I ask Teji Ahuja's question, I'm just looking at the fact that we're running out of time, but I quickly want to just also say that, it's also so incredible that your book has all these essays, which of course we've spoken of, but there's a chapter in your book on Partition by Urvashi Butalia, which talks of memory and memorializing, and those stories that she's referred to are absolutely beautiful. You have the section on poets, writers, thinkers, and artists in your book by Nadia Singh, and it's just so interesting how all of this is the restoring or the restoring or recovery, as you say, of partition. And is there a reason that you felt in your book that you had to bring all these beautiful aspects in? Like I said, it isn't a traditional book that just says this was the structure, this is how it was laid out, here's the history, and now that's, as an architect, I've done my job. It's really very, very interesting to me that all of this needed to come together for you, for it to feel complete. And I want to know why.
The thing is, if I had to say it very simply, is the story of Amritsar is a story of a lot of pain. In spite of the fact that it holds Harmandir Sahib right in the center, it's a very unique thing about Amritsar is that medieval cities normally have palaces and forts in the center. So when somebody attacks, when you have invaders, first the walls go down, then the town is ransacked, and then
Right.
you reach the house of the palace or the fort. The power centers.
Yeah.
In Amritsar, it's Harmandir Sahib that sits right in the center of the walled city, as if everybody was rallying to protect Harmandir Sahib, the most vulnerable and the most beautiful, and it touches everybody's soul. And even the Gobindgarh fort, which was built to protect the people of Amritsar, sits towards the northwestern side, outside the walls of the walled city. So the entire paradigm is very different in city planning. Now, the point is that when you try to understand Amritsar, you realize that there is a lot of pain. And while that pain is there, every, 50 years, there is, in fact, even less than that, unfortunately, there's been major, events in the history of Amritsar, which is very tragic. If you were to look at just the 20th century itself, you had Jallianwala Bagh in 1919. Right. You had Partition in 1947. Then you have 1984. It just goes on and on, like that. Now, I realize that this whole thing about where does the resilience come in the community to get up and get on and not feel victims. So and the fact that what are the elements that demonstrate that resilience, that engagement, that larger than your personal interest. So the essays have been very carefully selected to bring out that particular cyclical, narrative of Amritsar, and where the common person has actually contributed, because that's what the gurus did. They actually empowered every human being, and that's what you kind of see in the city. And so that's what the choices are, the choices that I made. But one thing I was very particular about was, because I saw it like that, and that's what I would say, I would compliment all my co-authors as well, who kind of understood it. I didn't have to describe it too much, is that we can't stop at any of the essays with just saying that, look, this happened in the past and that's it, and this is a story to be read. Every essay must tell you, okay, what is missing and what more can be done, because heritage is always in the making. And even in Urvashi's article, in her essay, very beautifully, she talks about what can we do, because she describes partition through the stories of few families, some who left Amritsar and some who came from the other side of the border and came and started living in Amritsar. And those stories, you choke over them. And then, of course, she talks about other such contested, histories in other parts of the world, and how have they commemorated, and what are their interventions in the recent times for reconciliation. And so, therefore, she talks about that. So I think I would, I would stop at that and urge. I hope that's a good sales pitch, and I would say, please
No,
get
I
your.
think it's really important for us to commemorate more. And I often think of, I mean, I know there's the partition, there are smaller spaces, but I really feel like there should be a space in Delhi which really talks of the pain. And it's, when you talk of the pain, and in the very beginning of this conversation, you spoke of how when you were telling your professor and you choked up, and you said we wondered why. And I know that I had the same feeling, and why I wanted to work on partition as well was I really believe in some sort of DNA memory, and I believe that that's what's led you to this as well. Teji Ahuja had asked about an architectural, I think, previous question, and it's gone now, but similarity between Lahore and Amritsar. But Poonam Ayub says, in all my past 15 to 20 forays to beloved Amritsar, I guiltily went to spend an unforgettable evening at Gobindgarh Killa and later discovered Gurmeet Rai's magical mind and hands in its new avatar. How lovely is that? But I don't know if you, thank you, Poonam, what a lovely thing to say. But we are out of time. But you want to quickly, maybe if you want to answer Teji's question.
Can you repeat the question? I understood there was something about Lahore and
I think
Amritsar.
he said, what is the architectural, perhaps he asked the architectural similarity. I think that's what he'd said.
Okay.
In terms of architectural relationship between Lahore and Amritsar and the damage.
We have to remember that Lahore is a much older city, and it was the Mughal capital with Akbar, there. And we also know that it was the capital of Maharaja Ranjit Singh as well. And subsequently, he did make Amritsar as the summer capital. But I would imagine bulk of his work must have been out of Lahore. This is speculation, but the similarities would be that we are in a region, if you were to see, how does a city get its character? It gets its character from the architecture for the common person, the havelis, the residential, the bazaars, and so on. Now, these two cities are so close to each other that in terms of architectural typologies, there would be similarity by way of havelis and the market streets and commerce and so on. The dissimilarities would be that there's Lahore has many more sites of Mughal period patronage, which unfortunately are lost in Amritsar, because I don't think the British altered Lahore as much as they altered Amritsar for reasons. If you were to look at the chapter on Ramba Garden in Harmandir in the book, in the Amritsar book, because what I've tried to even explain is that how through two single monuments, which is actually even the fabric of the city, between the Gobindgarh Fort and the Ramba Garden, that how altering a monument is an act of subjugation. And what they did to Gobindgarh Fort is a similar thing that they did to the Red Fort as well in Delhi, which they did not do to such an extent to the Lahore Fort. And because it didn't become I don't think it became a completely army cantonment. I mean, while it was occupied as a station, maybe headquarters, but it wasn't completely, embedded within a military cantonment. So in Amritsar, all the gardens which were outside the walled city were completely obliterated. They became civil lines, they became the military cantonment and all that. So we lost a lot of the Sikh period layer outside the walled city. Whereas in the case of Lahore, you've got all the Shalimar Gardens and all the tombs and all that. So Lahore compares quite a bit with Shahjahanabad and Delhi because of its antiquity and the royal patronage of the Mughal period. But in terms of domestic architecture, residential architecture, commerce, in terms of language, in terms of, it's not just the architecture, it's also the people who inhabit that architecture. So there's a lot of commonalities between people of Amritsar and people of Lahore. So you'll find a lot of, commonalities in architectural expression as well. And another thing we must...
Sorry, go ahead.
The other thing is about wall paintings. During Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, one thing that came across a lot is that buildings became rendered with a lot of frescoes, both interiors and exteriors. And these are painters who came down from the Kangra Valley and got amazing patronage during the Sikh period, and also all the crafts that came from Kashmir Valley. So that added to a lot of richness to both the cities. So Amritsar at one point was a complete painted city, and I would imagine so was Lahore. So there are other things as well. I'm sure we can have a session on that as well, between conversations
Absolutely.
between people from Lahore and people from Amritsar. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love, again, I think it sums up very beautifully the way you said people that inhabit the architecture, I think. And that's what's been so exciting for me personally about this conversation, about reading your absolutely beautiful book. And I'm holding it up for those who didn't see. This is the book. If you haven't picked it up yet, please go out and do it. I was lucky enough to get it as a present, and I'm going to really hold it very dear to my heart. And there's much more left to read of it. But thank you for this incredibly insightful. I think it feels like not enough for me to call it a work, because it really is the gift of Amritsar that you have given to all of us by delving so beautifully, so poignantly, so deeply, and with all of your heart and soul into this book, and bringing to life so much of Sikh history. And I think also for us, allowing us to find a way forward by reading this book, by being reminded, as you said, of the values of everything that the book embodies. And thank you for approaching architecture in this beautiful way as well. It's truly been very special for me, Gurmeet, to have this conversation with you. Thank you for coming to Sunday Stories. We are very, very grateful. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And if you'd like to support the oral history work and the mission of the 1947 Partition Archive, please consider making a donation of any size. For the 1947 Partition Archive relies 100% on donations as an NGO. And in some countries, donations are tax-free, so you have no excuse not to make that donation. Links are in the description to this video. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we'll see you again next Sunday at the same time for another lovely conversation on Sunday Stories. Thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you so much.